So, sociology as a science for AQA sociology, looking at theory and methods for paper 1 and 3. So when we think about sociology as a science, there are a few key arguments to this debate. First thing we need to think about is that the traditional sciences have key characteristics, and these would be objectivity, value freedom, using an inductive approach, quantitative methods, and it aims to make a prediction or generalization about the topic, and also aims to obtain a fact about a phenomena. The natural sciences that we would generally think about would be chemistry, biology, and physics. And there is a lot of debate about whether sociology can meet this criteria, whether sociology should be a science. So that's what we're going to look at here. We're going to look at the 6 key elements of the sociology and a science debate. Now, the first argument that comes to this is sociology can be a science. Now, this would come from the positivists, who we have seen a number of times already throughout this unit, particularly within the research methods, the work of Durkheim and Suicide, all essentially suggesting that sociology can be scientific because it uses quantitative scientific approaches like experiments and official stats. All science and all sociology should be objective, should be value free, and you can get factual knowledge and find social facts. So with this argument, sociology can be a science, and Durkheim proved via his research that you can study a sensitive, emotive, personal topic like suicide in a scientific way. So essentially the argument for sociology can be a science is all about positivism and the work of Durkheim as evidence of using a scientific approach. The argument that sociology could be a science comes from the work of Popper. Again, very similar to what we've already seen when we've looked at Popper in science and other topics before. But essentially Popper says that if sociology uses the inductive approach, obviously it's not scientific. So for Popper to be truly scientific, researchers need to start with a hypothesis, then test it, and then see whether their results can be proven or disproven. The big thing about the inductive approach is often you do the research and then you make conclusions afterwards. Popper says this is not a scientific or not truly scientific. Popper also argues that we need to use falsification. So if a theory can be proven wrong, then it's not true. That creates problems within sociology with the competing perspectives. That's an argument we're going to see a little bit later with Kuhn. And then the third argument is sociology should be a science. So this is coming back to realism and theorists like Bhaskar and Uri, who argue that sociology is like a science. It uses similar practices. So particularly when they talk about theories like Marxism, how it is using open systems or studying an open system, but looking at the structures, the cause and effect. So particularly with the Marxist argument, their argument is that capitalism is the effect that can be studied. You can see the impact of the effect, even though capitalism is an invisible force influencing life. So really what we're looking at is the cause and effect. The cause is capitalism, the effect it has on people's lives, that's what can be studied. So for realists, Marxism can be considered a science in the same way stuff like meteorology and other open system sciences are considered scientific. Now the arguments against this, that sociology is not a science, again will be familiar arguments to us. So sociology cannot be a science really comes from interpretivism. Sociology cannot be scientific because of the subject matter. So by studying human beings who have personal feelings, meanings, values, autonomy, it's impossible to study them in a scientific way. The real aim of interpretivist research, interactionist methods, would be to get that validity, that Verstehen, the human insight, the human understanding of the world. And you can't predict human behavior in the same way you can predict chemical reactions. So the can and can't arguments are polar opposites: positivism versus interpretivism. The couldn't argument for sociology couldn't be a science comes from, as I said, from Kuhn, who talks about the paradigms. So sociology does not work within a paradigms system. So within traditional sciences, an idea is introduced, all scientists accept it. If that idea changes over time or new evidence is found to disprove or falsify that idea, all the evidence that exists is rewritten. It's all changed. There's a scientific revolution. and all the paradigms shift, change, and update based on the new information that's been discovered. Sociology doesn't work in this way. So for the argument that we have all these different perspectives all competing for a single view of sociology wouldn't work. Sociology is pre-paradigmatic. So if we did adopt one shared paradigm, then sociology could be a science, but in that basis we would lose the essence of sociology. So really for Kuhn, the argument is that sociology cannot be a science, or couldn't be a science, because it's pre-paradigmatic. And lastly, sociology shouldn't be a science. This comes from sort of the theories like feminism, Marxism, and postmodernism. So all saying that sociology shouldn't be a science because it then loses the value of being a subject like sociology. So for feminism, by adopting scientific principles, you take on the male stream study of society. So male orientated research, which is about power of the researcher and the sort of weak position of the researchee. The focus on men's experiences and generalizing those to women. So feminists would say you would lose the ability to get a deeper understanding of the experiences of women. Marxists would highlight that science has always been used to justify the powerful. So capitalism, the ruling classes. So think early theories like Darwin's evolutionary models were used to support the dominant power and position of the ruling classes, survival of the fittest. Postmodernism again would argue that we can't take a scientific approach. It's coming back to their postmodern methodology, the librarian approach about collecting data, collecting information, and if we take a scientific approach, that's one way of understanding society, but it's not going to be the perfect example. They also kind of talk about the idea about if sociology was to take on this approach, it would become sort of almost like a meta-narrative, and obviously meta-narratives, obviously a big thing. Postmodernism pulls apart meta-narratives as obviously not being helpful for understanding. So there we have it. So this is sociology as a science, kind of very briefly summed up, but the key 6 arguments you can see here is it can, could, and should, and then can't, couldn't, shouldn't, and effectively they're polar opposites. So it is a two-sided debate. Depending on the arguments you get, you can sort of frame this information into an essay in any structure. As always, I hope this has helped provide a little bit of clarity of this debate. If you do like it, it has been helpful, leave a like or a comment just so I can sort of see I'm on the right tracks here. Obviously, don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching. And if you need to take a screenshot of this, again, it could be something quite handy as a little revision summary prior to an essay or an exam. Okay, there we go.